Okay, so I will start this off. Hopefully, some of you have read the book. It's about 300 pages. It's really a fascinating account and really gives insight into a lot of aspects of this issue, right from the health to the environmental aspect to the legal aspect. So if you haven't read the book, it's a really quick read, and we were discussing this, that it's a very accessible book. It's not very technical, so it's really easy reading. So I would really recommend this book, not just because I'm on this panel, but just generally. I want to start off this with Amir, of course. Amir, your association with the Kodaikanal mercury poisoning issue began when you covered the story for AFP as a journalist. Then you later joined Greenpeace, and as a campaigner, you actively worked closely on the issue. You have touched upon this in your book, your time as a journalist and your time in Greenpeace as well. But what really drew you to this issue, and what made you write a book about it?
Thanks, Anna. Thanks everyone for joining us today evening. This, as you mentioned, there were different phases in my life wherein I got associated with the issue in Kodaikanal, first as a journalist and then as a Greenpeace campaigner. And thirdly, as an observer, completely dissociated from the action which was going on for about 15 years. All through this period, as a journalist, when I first landed in Kodaikanal and understood the issue, subsequently, while working in Greenpeace with the victims, with the local community, with the environmental groups in India and sometimes outside. And thirdly, as an observer, looking at the issues which is happening, so the aspects of litigation, the aspects of continuous shareholder activism in India and in UK. So all this gave me immense knowledge over a period of 2 decades. Some of them I was privy to, some of them I was gathering the information and databasing the information. So at some point in time, I thought that this should be documented as a compendium that can be referred later. There were very large, seriously involved citizens in the campaign. As you would see in the book, Navroz Modi, Nityanand Jayaraman, quite a few people who were very tolerant in terms of their work, in terms of their direct involvement in the issue. So I thought some of them would write it, as a book when, at least when the issue comes to a closure. There were 2 parts of closure. One in 2015, the settlement with the ex-workers happened, and in 2019, the final verdict on the cleanup of the factory site came from the Supreme Court. So by 2019, you could say that the issue has almost come to a closure. And I was thinking that someone would write a book about it. I waited for almost about a year, and then when I was talking to multiple people, and then realized that nobody is attempting that. So that's when I thought that I should do that, and there came an opportunity of COVID. I had a lot of time at my hand working from home, so that's when I started writing it. As we were discussing outside, it probably took 3 to 4 months to finish it. In fact, in the first 1.5 to 2 months, I finished half of the book before I showed to the agent and the publisher. Not sure whether someone will publish it. The reason for that is not just the story by itself, but also the publisher's hesitancy to publish something like this, which in fact happened. While the agent was thrilled to work on it, he took it to multiple publishers. He took it to, his idea was this should be published by some large global publisher. So he put it for an auction with 3 of the large publishers, and all the 3 said, this is something which we really want to publish. But when the agent actually started discussing the details with the three publishers, which is beyond PanMac, I don't want to name the other two, the two largest publishers, global publishers. So they said, we don't want to publish it. We want to publish it, but unfortunately, we don't want to deal with it. There is a huge legal risk involved in it. So, so therefore, I think it's also because of that, I held back and I thought, should I write the rest of it or not? So till a publisher came on board, I wasn't writing the second part of it, the second half of it. So then I think once the publisher came on board, and then another month and a half to two, I finished the second part.
That's quite, I think, record time. If
and like I was telling you outside, Anna, this it's because most of the information was with me. As working with Greenpeace and collecting information over a period of 20 years. So it was easy for me, either in my head or in the papers, or in the computer, it was there. But if I were to start from the scratch, researching and writing, it probably would have taken much longer time.
Okay. And there are different aspects that you actually touch upon. But one of the things that struck me after I read the book was how much of a role chance actually plays, in exposing mercury poisoning in Kodaikanal. You write about this activist named Modi who stumbles upon these broken thermometers at a scrapyard, at a scrap shop in Kodaikanal. Then there's this scientist from Hyderabad whose curiosity over a spice used in a biryani actually leads him and his team to publish the most critical piece of scientific evidence in this case. So for me, that is worrying. What if these people had not stumbled upon these things, right? What if their curiosity had not been piqued? What do you have to say about this?
I really don't have an answer for that. Probably it would have been forgotten and not getting noticed by the way it is noticed today. The addendum I want to add there is on a everyday life. There must be dozens or hundreds of incidents happening around us, not getting noticed for the same reason. Unless somebody stumbles upon it, pick up the thread and then start working on it. Some serious campaigner comes in, and I think even campaigning is much more difficult today, given the kind of and policing which is happening around. It was not that easy those days, but it was early. It was much easier compared to what it is today. So I don't have any answer to that. I think some of these chance discoveries by Modi, by the scientists, so those actually help the campaign to move from one level to the next, and then eventually to the final conclusion. So yeah, it is a lot of hidden hands worked on the issue overall. Yeah.
I mean, our systemic checks really failed in this particular episode, and the role of regulatory bodies here. This brings me to you, Venkatesh. They play a very crucial role, regulatory bodies, in ensuring there are checks and balances in place that, especially with regard to this factory. In this particular case, the Kodaikanal thermometer factory registered itself as a glass manufacturing company to sort of evade checks and regulation. So while much of the book and much of the focus as well on the campaign talks about Hindustan Unilever's role in holding them accountable, what about the officials? Because I find it hard to believe that they didn't know that there was a thermometer factory in Kodaikanal and that it was actually a glass manufacturing unit. And what about their role in this entire mess?
See, one of the challenges that we have is, by and large, the state is complicit. It's complicit in majority of the cases. In fact, there's one instance where an accident of this nature happened. It saw some kind of, from our construct as lawyers, it's quite a logical conclusion in some process, to some degree at least. it does not happen in most of the cases because it was so the dogged perseverance of the lawyers in this particular case, the perseverance of the Greenpeace for such long period of time of engagement, and the sheer the kind of ingenuity and the kind of expertise which was non-existent with them, but the way acquired, for example, the person of Mr. Modi, the way he chanced upon it at one level and then he took it forward, met with so many officials, spoke to people, informed the local population, because it was something very difficult to do as you read this particular book. But what matters most in cases is that the regulatory authorities or the licensing authority, we have been saying that last 30 years removal of this license Raj. But at the same time, in inviting investments, we would like to turn a blind eye to many of the things. In fact, as a lawyer who's been working on this issue, coming from a place like Bellary, which is a mining issue, millions of hectares of land in that entire belt in Bellary and Anandpur district have been just destroyed by this mining. And the kind of dust, the cloud, the kind of deaths of some silicosis that happens in all these areas, it's so common. And most of it is not documented. And officials who were there, in fact, it so happened we were connecting a program on child rights concern. We did a survey on that. And I was part of that particular thing, fact-finding, and we also spoke to the authorities concerned, secretaries, and they called officers from Bellary district. And the way they responded, I said that the mining is not scientific in nature, because if you were to look into any lease, which is signed by the parties with the government, it would speak so many conditionalities the way mine need to be operated. Not a single condition is complied with in the process, never. So when we asked the officials, we had summoned them, that what that you're doing out there, they said that they are doing very scientific mining. I said, what do you mean by scientific mining? They used to do it manually previously, sir, but today we have Hitachi machine. So for him, a senior geologist of Bellary district, he was telling me that employing machinery, advanced machinery, which excavate much more, is scientific mining. So now the kind of, and he had absolutely no hesitance in making a statement of that nature. And that speaks volumes, because it happened to me in respect of sulfur factory in Bellary district again, or in coal mines in Chandrapur in Maharashtra, or in Jharkhand. We come across this power plants in Jharkhand. So when we look at the kind of impact which it has, regulatory authorities never ensure compliance with the procedures. One of the interesting part is these compliances are mandatory. And in fact, non-compliance would immediately entitle the government to cancel the license. And that happens. And whether it's Bangalore refinery case, or whether it is the kind of compliances which will need to be done for a power plant, many of thermal power plant, the authorities, we have a law on that, very clear laws on that. We have an amazing contractual documents which would specify, in fact, every aspect of a proper closure of a mine, or a proper compliance of certain procedures which are essential.
But these are all just academic papers in theory.
No, they're contracts. They're contracts, binding contracts signed by parties. So is the case in the one which is on hand. Most of the cases are contracts which do have fair amount of details. And these details, these are documents which have been a long time over, not that. In fact, mining agreements which I have been seeing as a young lawyer 40 years ago, I have been law student as 40 years ago, very detailed agreements which provide every space that ensures that it does not impact the agriculture, it does not impact the flora or fauna. It does not do any, the kind of thing which needs to be complied with. None of it is followed, and the waste which is generated, the way if you were to travel to KGF or Hatti gold mines or any place for that matter, when working on mining issues or mining in the area, the kind of places in Odisha, there is a documentary on that, Curse of Karna. I think it was screened here once. The mining operations and the manufacturing operations, the pollution and the kind of impact on the society is to the knowledge of the government, to the knowledge of the authorities, and most of it is non-compliance. And the impunity with which these things happen is one of the major areas of work. In fact, that's one of the aspects which I want to talk today, is the impunity. Where this impunity comes from. And,
Because there's no legal action taken against these officials?
in all these cases, the action should be natural. The fact that the compliances need to be for any factory relating to the safe working place. For example, when you read this particular book, you will see that majority of the workers had no safety equipment at all. Never wore safety equipment. No gloves, no masks. They were working with one of the most dangerous metal. Bullet 2, lead and mercury, the most dangerous. It can cause havoc with your life. In fact, if you were to read the book, the kind of impact in Alzheimer's issues, or whether it's Parkinson's, or many of the other aspects which you talk in terms of, or that in the course of it, they talk in terms of the mercury poisoning, the Hucklebee's family case. You see that the compliance is never done. And the cost factors, the companies which would like to cut costs, so they will turn a blind eye. The factory inspectors who's supposed to visit, and in fact, that's not even explained in this. Every factory, there will be a factory inspector visitation, and he would submit a report. And in that report, he has to mention whether they think these following things are complied with. He would say yes, tick mark yes to everything. A small money is paid to him, he's tipped off. This is something which happens in every factory. Yeah. So that's something which is, the compliance is one of the major issues which is there. Regulatory authorities have the power. There is a specific law relating to them, and no compliance. One of the major challenges that we have in this country is that there is no reparations on that. But that one of the major challenges is that non-existence of the proper reparations on the kind of instance of this nature. That's something which is a big challenge.
Disha, I just want to come to you. You know, this is sort of like a recurrent theme in India, the fact that it takes a disaster or somebody from civil society to actually expose the rot, right? So where does the problem lie? Is it official apathy? Is it corruption? In your opinion, what is it?
I honestly think it's a combination of all of these, because when civil societies want to work on multiple issues, one of the biggest limitations is the fact that they don't have enough resources. All the ones that have been doing incredible work, like Greenpeace themselves, Amnesty, Oxfam, and other environmental NGOs across the country, have been losing their funding. Their accounts have been frozen. They're being slapped with legal cases. Ami spoke about how even his book had trouble being accepted by some of the biggest publishers in the country. So everyone is currently at a stage where they're terrified of being slapped with legal charges and losing the autonomy, limited autonomy that they have. So they can't actually move forward with finding solutions because they're scared of just losing the limited freedom they have. So it also stems from the fact that we don't respect, like the state doesn't respect critical feedback, it doesn't respect any sort of suggestions or interact with opposing ideas, and this has limited how much civil society can do. There's also this very negative idea with the public about what civil societies do and what activists do. And that has also stemmed from the fact that a lot of national media outlets in the country have been are being bought by state or have been bought for a really long time. So all of this really determines the amount of work that goes into protecting environment, not just in Kodaikanal, but across the country. And this is really concerning. And it has made us, a lot of civil society groups, reactionary in the sense that we rise up to challenges that are put forth to us instead of actively working on issues we can foresee because, once again, of limited resources, of public perception of us, and the fear of being jailed, honestly.
Actually, I want to go back to the point about regulatory bodies. In the Kodaikanal issue, Amir, it is the Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board that is supposed to be the regulator. In the book, in one chapter, you say that TNPCB plays the role of an empire. And the use of the word empire, I thought was interesting, the choice of the word, because you seem to suggest that they play a neutral role when actually they should be controlling pollution, right? How do you evaluate TNPCB's role before and after?
Yeah, so, the role of the regulator is very critical in such situations. There are multiple regulators to regulate manufacturing of this sort. But the Pollution Control Board is a very, very important regulator. And then you have the Factories Inspectorate, as Venkatesh was mentioning, and then you have different levels, Central Pollution Control Board, then you have the quasi-judicial bodies like the Green Tribunal, so on and so forth. In all of this, the state PCB is a very important player. Now here in this particular case, you could see that, as I've written in the book, the two phases of PCB's intervention or level of intervention in the issue. First is till a very active chairperson, Sheila Rani Chungat, was at the helm of affairs. That was till about 2004. In fact, it was a very critical period. With her help, with the chairperson's help, whatever a PCB, a pollution control board could do or should have done, has been done during that period. The moment there was Navroz Modi announced waste dump from the scrapyard, a team was sent, and the waste from the scrapyard was excavated and moved to the factory under PCB's supervision. You could also see that this was ordered to send back to US for recycling. So there's a whole lot of action happened till Sheila Rani Chungat was chairperson, which was the kind of action you would expect from a regulator. Maybe I think we could say that almost about 90% of the real delivery which is expected of a regulator was done during that period. But subsequent to that, you could see that there's a lot of vacillation from the regulator, and which eventually lapsed into a kind of failure from the regulator. The remediation which could have happened, something which happened in 1983 till 2001. The remediation would have happened within a couple of years. All the process would have been from the regulator side. The action should have been happened at the pace of light, and then remediation should have started in 2003, 2004. But remediation is happening now after 20 years, which actually complicated the whole situation. And the culprit there is the regulator. I think with a dilly-dallying regulator who's probably bought in by the people who want to take advantage of that. So we had a situation where the cleanup is happening after 20 years.
I just want to go back to activism, and the book actually talks about Sophia Ashraf's role. She's a Chennai-based rapper, and she came up with this song called Kodaikanal Won't, which was sort of a take on Nicki Minaj's song Anaconda, and it went viral. And that song really helped draw the campaign, or took the campaign rather to the youth, which who I think may not have heard of the issue or brought it to their notice otherwise. So how important or useful is social media for environmental campaigns like this?
Firstly, please, everyone go watch that song. It's really catchy and very beautiful and very powerful. I loved it personally. And I think songs and creative mediums like art has been very powerful to get across a message, especially about environmental campaigns. I think, personally speaking, the age-old agenda has been that environmental activists are seen as tree huggers, and we like to talk about these broader issues, but one of the limitations is that we end up talking in our same bubbles. That is also how social media's algorithms are trained. So when art is created, whether in the form of music or comics or anything else, honestly, it breaks out of that bubble and reaches a wider audience, which is why I personally think these different forms are really important, because we can't preach to the same choir. We need to reach different people, and social media has the ability to do that. It is also limiting because it also restricts who views your content, but I think the environmental movement has been very actively using these different tools to reach out to different audiences, because the issues, environmental issues specifically, affect every single person, because what happened in Kodaikanal doesn't actually stay there. The examples and the lack of compliances is not something that's limited to Kodaikanal itself. It is very rampant around the country. We don't take compliance of environmental regulation seriously. There is a huge lack of any form of respect for the environment. This also exacerbated by the fact that the government itself is weakening environmental protection laws, one of the most recent one being the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill, which is going to be tabled in the Rajya Sabha tomorrow. So it is very important that we explore all avenues to ensure that the message reaches different people, and social media plays a huge role in that. I think it especially heightened after the pandemic, where we were forced to go online because we were at home, we couldn't go on the street. And people really realized the power of social media, because once again, we were forced to do it. And that has continued even when the restrictions have eased. And I think social media can play a huge role in that.
Come back to you, Venkatesh. The book talks about the fact that the Indian judicial system has no provision for class action suits, where a group of people can sue a corporation for damages caused to them. And in the Kodaikanal case, they use the writ of mandamus to basically direct the state to perform its duty. So the fact that we don't have class action suits, isn't that a big lacuna in our law?
No, the courts have always come, the Supreme Court in India have always come with very wonderful new ideas that have been brought into. I think that should be the way forward. For example, many of the kind of rights that we enjoy today, from the 80s to the judicial activism which we have seen, as a young lawyer, I have grown with that, and totally the new way of looking at litigation and the new way of reaching out to the man in the street. The Supreme Court has been doing a great job in all these years. And then look at the kind of the history of judiciary in India, it's enviable when it compared to various other countries as well. So looking from that construct, I don't think it is not an impossible situation. But what has happened is that many of these concepts which you talk in terms of compensation or the kind of damages that happen to the environment, the individual is supposed to seek that relief. That's one of the, in fact, even in this particular case, it's set of affected workers who moved the court. So the individual who is impacted by pollution, she reaches out for relief from the court, saying that state has failed. Because if you were to say that it is the factory, the company that has failed, the entire litigation becomes a private litigation and you have to file a suit in a trial court. It's almost next to impossible. As a practicing lawyer, I've seen that years on end on these litigations. But the state has a duty, because in any failure of this nature, the state has a duty. For example, he was talking about the Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board. He was talking in terms of, I was talking in terms of factory inspector, or whether the local municipal authorities, whether it's relating to water, whether it's relating to cleanliness, hygiene, whether it relates to the hazardous waste, because this is a hazardous waste. So when you look into all these aspects, there is so many regulatory mechanisms which need to be complied and need to be reported on a regular basis by the officers. So their failure would entail that the state has a duty to compensate. So now that was the nature of litigation that was proceeded in this case. There was no necessity for that, given that the law that we have in this country does not provide for a larger space. In fact, the way it also talks in terms of Erin-Brockovich instance, which is also a class action proceedings. So that is not available. But I think the way we need to pursue the matters of this nature to an end where is that the class action can be brought into as a process in the judicial thing. That's a crying need. Because many of these cases don't get reported. In fact, as my personal experience goes as a lawyer, in the last 3 decades, I used to file regularly the good number of the public interest litigation and on behalf of the people, mining issues across the country, whether Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, or in Jharkhand. We have done with litigation. We see a very serious challenge. First, the petitioner is won over by the companies. 2, he is intimidated. 3, if the person is very strong, we have a case in Jharkhand who fought a case against Tatas, Muni Hansda. So she was prosecuted saying that she had committed theft of her husband's bike. You can't imagine, it's so really Kafkaesque when you talk in terms of the kind of litigation that we have to. When she calls, the husband calls me, my wife is accused of committing theft of my bike. You can't imagine that. So to silence voices, the establishments are used. And these litigations find it difficult to pursue, very, very difficult to pursue. In fact, many a time I had to, they will come and take no objection from me, and they will engage some other lawyer and withdraw the petition. So therefore now the public interest litigation has become more suspect. One, that it is a tool for making some money. It's the quick money. You can file a case against the company and blackmail them to pay some money and be done with it, then withdraw the litigation. So now if you were to go to High Court, Karnataka rules, there is a set of writ rules relating to public interest litigation. The complaints procedure itself will take a month and a half to 2 months. You get your case registered. So what harm that happens in the process, or that how difficult it is for someone to approach the court, that's one of the major challenges that we have. And this is not happening only in state like Karnataka, it's happening across the states. So when you talk in terms of issues of this nature, there is this green bench that comes into play on environment issues. And this green bench is so opaque, or absolutely, the petitioner is suspected to be a criminal, suspected to be someone who is going to make some quick money, or someone who is a nuisance, someone who wants to make some name for himself, or someone who is a politician who wants to gain some advantage. So the moment you look at a petition, we are looking at all these aspects. So when all these aspects or the court comes to the conclusion, none of them exist, so it's a genuine petition, the court take up the petition then. Now, how many of us will have that amount of patience to answer all these aspects? You must read that kind of procedures which are there in Karnataka High Court procedures. So one of the major challenges is that these processes make it very difficult for even to seek. That there is no law relating to it is one part. The second part is that the constitutional provisions that we have in respect of the writs that we have writs are so powerful because a writ is something which the court can transcend all these barriers and reach out to the person. And that's the nature. In fact, it's much better than the writs that are existing in UK. And the very nature is that when we seek any relief, that a writ order or a direction in the nature of writ of mandamus or certiorari or prohibition of quo warranto. So we speak on that. So there is a writ, order, direction. You can give anything. Just try to see that this is remedied. So that's a kind of power that has been vested under the Constitution in India. But how effectively it is being employed is one of the major challenges. I think there is a necessity for a bigger discourse on this subject. I think this book should generate that kind of debate as well, much needed debate. Because two aspects matter. One, reparation to the affected individuals and communities, to reparation to the environment. Yeah. In fact, that's one of the major challenges. And the impact of, we're talking in terms of mercury. We have to, you come to me, I'll take you to manganese, I'll take you to iron ore, I'll take you to coal. So many places where the occupational diseases are suffered not only by the workers, but also by the population out there. That's one of the major challenges.
Amir, it took 15 years for them to get compensation. It's been 7 years since they actually got compensation of an undisclosed amount, 20 years since the factory shut down. But how do the people, the ex-workers included, how do they view the issue now? Is there a sense of closure? You did speak about closure. Is there a sense of anger? How do they really, look at it now?
So there are different segments of the society which is to be looked at when we're talking about closure. One is the ex-workers. Their case have been sort of settled. Many of them suffering from exposure to mercury, direct exposure to mercury at the workplace. So that's kind of taken care by the settlement. And then the local community, which is living nearby the factory, mercury is a metal which is just getting out into the surroundings. And it is not just the workers who are inside the factory who's getting exposed, but even the people outside the factory walls are getting exposed to the metal over a period of time. So unfortunately, there's not been any effort to study the impact on them, either by health assessment or an epidemiological survey or anything of that sort. So there, as far as they are concerned, the local community is concerned, there was no addressal of their problems. Therefore, there is no closure. And thirdly, the larger flora and fauna beyond the 22 acres of the factory land, which is completely devastated. And the DAE scientists who found that there's about 2,640 times of mercury in the atmosphere, 2 years after shutting down the factory. And the further studies, which shows that the extent of mercury in the atmosphere is very bad even now. So, those, I think the second and the third parts are concerned, there is no closure. It is, I don't know whether any time they're going to be there, their issues are going to be addressed and there could be a closure. So, if you're looking for a closure, I don't think there is a real closure. But of course, people have moved on. People have moved on because they wanted to move on. Also, the Kodaikanal is a tourist town. People wanted to. Everyone in Kodaikanal is some way or the other related to tourism. Someone has a coffee shop. Someone has someone is working in a resort kind of thing. So everyone also have this fear that if there is more bad news about this in the state or beyond the state, the tourist inflow could be impacted. So they don't want to continue with this any longer. So people have moved on. So to that extent, of course, there is a closure.
Yeah, in fact, we were discussing this a couple of days ago about how you said one of your friends said don't buy cottage cheese because who knows if there's mercury in it. But yeah, I mean, that is, it's unfortunate that,
It happened.
yeah.
When I wanted to buy cheese, this wonderful feta cheese there, which is known for Kodaikanal, I went and was buying that. He said, don't buy it here. I'll get you something better. This is mercury level. He told me that.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing it gets percolates. For example, we normally don't look at that. So, for example, we have Rishabhavati. I heard stories of old people out there. It's Rishabhavati is river in Bangalore. And
The mic.
Rishabhavati is river in Bangalore. And I have heard stories of Rishabhavati where the people used to go for a swim, and I've seen people fishing in that particular river and all that. And today, if you go, it flows next to National Law School in the middle of the Bangalore University campus and goes towards Kangeri. And today it's a huge hazardous waste to drain. And when you see that we look at pollution coming from meat as something an issue, but every leafy vegetable which you buy in Bangalore is suspect. Every leafy vegetable you buy in Bangalore is suspect of some lead, of some chemical, something which can be very debilitating, that's something which can be carcinogenic. It's that every time you buy something, you're not sure. Now, the impact of the pollution is such. So, therefore, when you talk in terms of closures, when we see that, is it happening? And how effective are the agencies in addressing this issue? We don't look at that. I think that's one of the major challenges. For example, we have our BWSSB. What exactly the process or program that it has on these issues? It's opaque. Nobody knows except collecting fee from us. We don't ask questions, and there's nobody answering any.
I want to actually, there are different ways to look at this particular issue. I mean, there's the environmental issue, the health, corporate negligence, but there's also a human rights aspect to this particular issue. Can you elaborate on how this is a human rights violation?
You see, when you talk in terms of any of this activity, more particularly, so we are talking human rights at a larger level. We talk of civil liberties, we talk in terms of workers' rights, we are talking in terms of women's rights, child rights, even environmental issues. All of them are sections of human rights that we have, because it impacts the human life. That's something which is so crucial. So the challenges on this is that many a time the systems, the organizations, the state tries to narrow it down. For example, if you were to read this book, it will come down that in the beginning, the entire litigation stood up from the workers' perspective. But whereas the larger impact was on the society. That every man out there who uses water in that area, in the Pambar Valley, in the Pambar River, has drinks there, animals that drink there. The wildlife, it's a reserved forest areas in that part of it. Berijam Lake, we have traveled in that area. So the flora, the fauna, the livelihood, the kind of irrigation, the kind of agriculture, they have the finest beautiful potatoes which grow there, lovely cauliflowers, carrots. We consume them. How much is less? So when we talk in terms of these aspects, yes, the human rights are violated. That I have a right to life, right to a safer environment is also part of fundamental rights in Article 21 of the Constitution. Now there has been a series of judgments on that particular aspect. And if you look at the Godavarman's case, which we have, it is ongoing litigation for decades now, and with so many proceedings happening in that, so many orders being passed on that. So this is some area which is a human right, considered as human rights by courts. But the biggest challenge is how many of our people are able to access that, question that, or sustain litigation on that, sustain kind of challenge to the violations. That's the big challenge, because majority of the people who are victims, do not have any power or strength. They're very weak and they can't agitate against a very powerful state. And more particularly, the kind of state that we have, the agencies of the state, whether it is police, whether it's administration, they are with the corporations, they are with the industry, they are with the authorities, totally as against the people. So anyone who raises a question on that is supposed to be somebody to be punished, somebody to be silenced. I think that's something which is the nature. So there is this violation of human rights. And a number of cases of this nature. People have been killed, maimed, officers murdered in this country because they have asked questions. It's a common place to find every year, if you were to keep tracking on that number of officers who were killed in these cases, who raised questions on illegal mining, raised questions the way mining was done, raised questions a factory being run, the pollutions. Many of them have been killed or many of them have been prosecuted. I had an officer who was sentenced. He was assured that he lost his job. He was convicted. And he lost the litigation all the way to Supreme Court, and he completed 3-year sentence and came back to my office. So that's the kind of things anyone who is upright finds it difficult. It's not only the people. So the human rights is a violation in this country is really rampant. It's virtually, there's no control on that particular aspect is concerned. And state, therefore I always talk in terms of the impunity. All these acts come with a greater degree of impunity. Because the state has not willing to be accountable. State is not being willing to be accountable. Despite all these regulations, despite all the statutes in place, despite all these procedures that were established for all this. For example, it's not just a statute. Each statute has a set of rules to follow. How those objective of the statute is realized. And none of these rules are followed with. In fact, if we were to look into this case of Kodaikanal, a million other cases. It's only that it's a case study which is really seen some reporting and some kind of a detailed exposure. And if you were to see the kind of affidavits filed or reports submitted by the so-called scientists who were won over and bought over or won over by the corporations. Yeah. So when you look at impunity at every level, the companies feel that they can buy it off.
Yeah.
They can buy a report. In this case, that's something which is the case. I think Amir should be in a position to answer that part. Yeah.
No, I think I'll just pick up the point, threads which you mentioned about the number of scientists who were bought over by the company in this case, and all the institutes which got involved in this case of the finest institutes in the country. All India Institute of Medical Science, Indian Toxicological Research Center, and you name the institute, NEERI, it's there. And at the end of it, and you find that the positions of the company has been ascertained by the set of scientists who came from these institutes. Despite everybody else knowing very well that it is not the right position. So I think it's very unfortunate. And in one instance, there is a doctor, a very respected doctor from the All India Institute of Medical Science, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, ascertaining a position of the company multiple times. So I think, you could very well understand what is going on there. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand the kind of work which is being done by company on So it is disappointing. It is very shameful to the least. But I think that's how our society has deteriorated.
Actually, that sort of brings me to my question for you, Disha, is that the book actually talks about the importance of data and science in ensuring prosecution of of Hindustan Unilever. How important is its use frequently in amongst environmentalists? Because the book talks about Greenpeace International having their own sort of set of researchers to come and do the study. So is this something that is actively used here in India?
Yes, because there is, from the opposing side, there is usually an assumption that we are tree huggers who don't have our facts straight. So one of the first things that most environmental movements, all environmental movements that I have worked with at least, have been to check facts, have been to consult with environmental lawyers, researchers, experts in that field, and to get the data out, get the facts out. One of the first steps in any sort of campaign is to establish those facts, use science, make it more consumable for a larger audience, because you can't go out there and tell people to protect a certain region or something without telling them why it's important. You have to tell them why it's important for them, why it's important for the ecosystem in a way, like you have to give them a lot of reasons. So science has always been integral, and I honestly appreciate a lot of the environmental research that have the researchers that have really put their work into it. A lot of environmental movements also have like their in-house researchers, and it is a group that is very valued, because you can't proceed with a campaign without science, without data, and without facts. And it forms the crux of any, if you want to take legal action. And that's one of the reasons that we really value it.
Just to supplement, and I think one of the landmark incident in our environmental history is Bhopal disaster.
Yeah.
And all of us know, people from that time, all of us know that methyl isocyanate was the reason for so many people getting killed, overnight. But still, I think when the litigations went on, dragged on for years and years, science has to prove that MIC was the reason for these people getting killed, and MIC is still there in the soil. So there has to be tests conducted. So I think it's become paramount that we need to establish the science behind it, and more importantly now the data. How much of the larger data sets, the better chance of winning the case.
Towards the end of the book, you actually cite one study that says that that up until 2050, there will still be some amount of mercury in the soil, which is extremely worrying, right? 2050 is many years away. But like, what do we know of the ecological impact? You said we don't know much about, the general population, how their health was affected. But what about the ecology of Kodaikanal? Do we have any studies, like new studies that talks about it, that looks at it?
Yeah. So this is, fortunately, this case is the Kodaikanal mercury poisoning has become a landmark case for researchers to get into action. That's obviously started with the DA team, chancing upon the discovery. But later, researchers, physicists, chemists, biologists, and all of them found that this is a treasure mine, and they all got into it and started working different aspects of it. It's been numerous studies starting 2004. Some of the latest studies, I think one you picked up and mentioned that there's going to be mercury in the soil, not just in the factory site, but even beyond the factory site in that area, for at least a century. We're talking about a century period where the mercury is going to be disappearing from the area, from the soil in that area. So I think this is a modeling study conducted by IIT Hyderabad. Annamala University conducted a further study in 2021, which again they took mercury levels in soil, in water at various intervals at different lakes, and they found that the nearest water source, the mercury level is at least 6 times more than the normal. So that's the current level. I think we are talking about 6 times normal mercury levels in the water.
This is the Kodai Lake, which is like...
Yeah. So that's just the sample, we could look at.
Okay. Venkatesh, you spoke about remediation earlier. There's, as far as the environment is concerned, there's very little that, was done, as far as HUL is concerned. So how do you sort of look at this? I mean, yes, on one side, the workers, ex-workers did get compensation, but as far as the environment is concerned, there was, very, very little done. And in fact, the government helped water down the regulatory standards, right? And that's what the book says at the end. So how do you sort of view this long fight for justice? I mean, is it really justice if...
One of the challenges that we see, that I call it as...
the mic, please.
I call it as no one killed Jessica. So there is a syndrome that we have. It's that in good number of cases it just happened. So no one is responsible for what happened. So the way the companies absolve themselves, the way the state absolves of its responsibility, or the agencies of the state absolve the responsibility, they just would not like to bother about what happens. So that's one of the major challenges that happens, and not necessarily in India. I have seen across the developing part of the world. So it's very commonplace on that. Now that's a big challenge, and this was a rare case where it was the entire pollutant, all the material, all the things sent back. The dump was returned. A rare case of that nature, but majority of the instances, the dumping happens in the developing part of the world, and the kind of impact that has on the people, nobody would like to record or account for the same. In fact, here was a case. Initially, there was some amazing report that brought about for example, the study of lichens, from vegetable biryani to trying to research on lichens and how the mercury levels were found at much higher level, which on the stone, on the water, in the mass. The kind of very scientific approach that was employed by the Atomic Energy research. So this never happens. Some officers, some persons who are keen interest on finding some report may come with a thing, but subsequently when we look into, these things are scuttled, systematically scuttled, and the powers that be employ that. And today everybody is suspect. The state is suspect, the legislators or legislature itself is suspect, the judiciary is suspect, the agencies of the state are suspect. So the kind of, it finds very difficult, uphill task for anyone to take up a matter of this nature. Therefore, when you look at this construct of these kind of things, there needs to be more awareness, and there needs to be that engagement of a civil society. In fact, this happened. In fact, if you were to look into this, read this book, you will see a very clear case how civil society engaged in this process, how it engaged in making people understand the mercury poisoning, and how people who would lynch the person talking against the factory learned the information, how it was communicated to them. So that happens. So it takes a longer process on that particular front. And the agencies of the state at this point of time, in most part of the world, it's not necessarily in the developing part. In the developed part of the world, they would like to scuttle the reports. They would like to destroy the reports because the profit becomes more important. The enterprise market is more important than anything else. So the development narrative that we have, the kind of development narrative which we absorb so that we are doing more developmental work. The center factory was part of the developmental work. The center factory was a part of the developmental work, that we would bring in investment from abroad for generating employment for people. What was being generated was life-threatening. So this happens across the country. It's happening on a daily basis, whether it is asbestos, whether it is zinc, whether it's coal, any of them. In fact, you go to Rajasthan to the beaches of Kollam, because the beaches of Kollam we have radioactive metals out there. So sand mining is happening in courts of Tamil Nadu. So you look at this construct, the state is complicit. State looks at the development model, how to make more money out of it, how to allow marketing of this particular, for example, coal. How much sulfur is there in coal? Indian coal is very suspect. It's not good coal. Indian coal is high concentration of sulfur. And we are burning like anything, and we are for the purpose of generating electricity. So how much is good? How much pollution is happening in the air on a daily basis? We're not sure. Hardly any studies on that particular aspect. So when you look at the kind of challenges that a country like India faces, is huge, and it's common to all the countries out there. State acts complicit. That's one of the major challenges. Therefore, I see the impunity with which these things are done. In that, this is a clear case of impunity. That they could silence or make when you look at the composition of the team ordered by the court in this particular case, is that almost all the persons who are on the board or were in association with the company had done something or taken benefit from the company in one way or the other in various other projects. So how would they talk against the company? This happens in all the cases. It's a majority of the cases you find it very difficult. And in respect of data, which you're talking in terms of research and other things, it's so difficult this was a case which was supported by Greenpeace, the kind of others, active persons, or someone like Sheila Chunkar. Sheila was one of the finest officers in PSB, in fact, PCB. She had asked me to work on this plastic. She had asked me. And in fact, her officials were so angry that I was asked to come and do the litigation assistance or drafting assistance for a litigation on plastics in Chennai. Because she was wanting somebody else who is really genuine on this issue and get someone on it. She was a very good officer. But it's, as you said in the beginning, it's a chance that Navroz Modi saw the dump. A chance that someone in Hyderabad looked at lichens. And a chance that we had someone like Sheila. So the tragedy is that we are put to such a situation for these stories to come out with such kind of chances. I think that's really the tragic part. That should not have been.
We'll come to audience questions in just a bit. I have one last question that all of you can take, but Amir first. Do you believe that there were any lessons learned from the Kodaikanal mercury poisoning issue? And if so, what are they?
So, I think the lessons are multiple lessons. In fact, some of which are very important to the extent that people have to be very vigilant. Especially if you're living near a manufacturing facility, irrespective of what is being manufactured there. You must be familiar with this NIMBY campaign, not in my backyard campaign, which is raging in the US decades ago. So whatever happens in your backyard, you are responsible equally. So if you can't stop it, nobody else can. So, I mean, this is a typical in a case where people from the backyard picked it up and they said, it's not in our backyard, and stopped the manufacturing. So, I think that's the greatest lesson which I would say it's coming out of this incident.
Disha?
I think for me, also to build on Venkatesh's point, it's the fact that the governments and even corporations don't see environment or nature to have its own rights. And this is something that's being advocated, especially in Ecuador and Brazil, where it's called the right of nature, where they emphasize on the fact that nature and environment has its own rights. And here, when they didn't compensate for the ecological destruction that they caused, they ruined what was supposed to be an eco-sensitive zone. They ruined a lot of people's lives, and there was no compensation for that. So because they see it as a collateral damage to development, and because they see development as something that is exclusive to environmental and sustainable development, and without realizing that for us as a country to develop, we need to do it in a climate resilient manner. We need to take into account that we are one of the most vulnerable countries to the climate crisis. So the lesson to me personally is that while we do need development, we need better infrastructure, it has to be planned well. You have to look at it in the future. How is this going to look 10 years from now? Is this going to benefit people, or is this actually causing detrimental impacts to the environment and to the people? Because we aren't separate from the environment, we are extensions of it. And for us to not see that factor and just focus on blind development is very concerning. That's why a lot of environmental activists are seen as anti-development, when the truth is we aren't anti-development. We just want you to see that they can go hand in hand. And that's why it's important for them to make sure that corporations like HUL and other big corporations keep in mind that nature has its right, that people have their rights, and respect that. And when they develop, it's taken into account.
Final thoughts on lessons learned?
There is a need for accountability. I think that's one of the major challenges I look at is accountability. The absence of accountability is one of the major challenges. Two, that the kind of world that we live in, the kind of climate change that's happening, the kind of rains that we get, the kind of disturbance that's happening in monsoons that we see on a regular basis, that all these things are contributed over the last century of absolute abuse. So when you talk of impunity, I'm not talking in terms of a very limited Kodaikanal concept. The abuse is at the global scale, and we are paying for that. In fact, when you travel places, whether you travel in the Alps or Himalayas, or whether you travel in the oceans out there in the Southeast Asia or anywhere in India, any part of it, you see the change. You see the change which is really affecting livelihoods. It's affecting life. It's affecting flora. It's affecting fauna. It's their impact is devastating impact happening on that. So there is a need that the civil society people like us need to be, this awareness need to be given more to people, and the accountability is made mandatory. And one of the major challenges that we have, that development is needed, but what kind of development? Whether the development is sustainable. It's not just that we have some sustainable development SDGs out there would bring in a change. I don't think that. Unless there is a very concerted effort towards bringing a change. In fact, I had been in Switzerland recently, and I found that I was sweating at 12,000 feet. Heat was so much out there. Coming from South India, I had packed myself to the tea with all my sweat and everything, and I had to remove all of them, and I was on my t-shirt at 10 to 12,000 feet. And it's happening across. You go to rivers, the kind of food that we eat, every aspect is being impacted. And there is a need that it's not just some goals that are being set or marked, it's a larger discussion, debate need to happen at one level. And accountability is something which needs to be assured to people. That's something which is the case. What kind of development we have? How sustainable is development? Every act which the state does, every industry that brings in, is it bringing in this particular? Today, the environmental impact assessment is shut down. It's a joke in this country. If you talk in terms of, my friends have been participating, I have been reported on this, on the so-called environmental impact reports, how they have been scuttled, how they have been doctored. It's a joke. So I think there is some necessity that such kind of things need to be made more efficient. And accountability. For me, more important is that when we start with that kind of accountability, that everyone is supposed to do a proper research and respect that kind of work that happens, so then it is sustainable. I think that kind of change that need to happen. So.
We can open up to questions. I can bring the mic around.
Hey, hi. My name is Rahul. I'll just give you a brief intro of myself. I head the OTT operations at Vimeo. I'm a subcommittee chair for Vimico, which is a group for environment and sustainability. I have two questions, one for Venkatesh and Amin. Firstly, congratulations, Amin, on the book. Venkatesh and Amin, do you think strict regulations within India would suffice for us to, have that sustainable future for our kids?
The regulation that we have, it's a very interesting story. One of my friends told, I'll say a very small narrator, that one of my friend, Dr. Shidhar Ramurthy, who runs Environics Trust in Delhi, she did a survey of the facilities given by the government to the people in the hills of Uttarakhand. So he visited a village where that old woman opened the door and she told him that beta to aankh band kar. So you close your eyes. Government has provided all these things. It has given gai ke liye chara, cattle feed, the cattle, the road, the school, the toilet. Everything is given to us. Beta aankh mat kholna, nahi dikhega. So now it may sound a very joke, but the thing is that that's a big challenge that we have. When you look at the kind of documents that we have, laws that we have, good amount of research goes into it, in legislations, very robust legislations. At least some of these legislations really very good. When you look into Mines Act or many of these acts that we have, pollution control or hazardous waste management issues, laws are very robust on that particular aspect. What matters is that who is going to enforce these laws? The agencies that are created under this particular statutes that are there, they do not enforce it. So the issue comes in that we do have great amount of legislations, we do have great amount of literature on that particular law. Maybe there is some room which is available that can be changed, but good part of it already exists. But the construct is that not enforced. If you were to read, for example, one, there is mining agreement, which is the ML lease agreement. If you read that lease agreement, I don't mind sharing a copy of the very old 1950s document, that is, it was prepared in 1950s. If you read the lease agreement, you will see the kind of provisions that are set in to ensure that how flora, how fauna, how agriculture is not affected, how the livelihoods are not impacted. Every aspect need to be complied on. And with all these things, they say if you do proper mining, we will give you a vested right of renewal. So when that particular agreement which you read, everything is in place. But do you see any mining being covered up? That they do operations, open cast mining, which happens without using water. You are not supposed to do the blasting. The moment there is a road which are there where you take the trucks need to be covered. The top need to be watered. So there should not be a spillage of dust or dirt or the mine particles onto the road or agriculture. So you have all these aspects written down under the statutes. Never complied. So the regulation which we have good amount of regulations. The compliance is the major challenge that we have in this country. That's a big challenge.
Just to supplement, I think I partly agree with Venkatesh. We have a great foundation in terms of legislations in this country. Of course, some of the path-breaking legislation came in later. Environment Protection Act came in '86. We didn't have much of it till then.
Recently, we scuttled down Forest Conservation Act.
Yeah.
Just a couple of days ago.
Yeah. So
it's no more as strong it was.
I think we have a great foundation of legislations in protection of environment in this country. Notwithstanding the last 10 years of legislations, which are many of which are not in very good taste. We talked about the forest legislation, and also in this particular case of Kodaikanal, we found that there is a intervention value, decision making on intervention value, which is decided by the Ministry of Health, wherein in these kind of situations, what is the best level for reclaiming the area to the livable standards, which is diluted. In fact, much was diluted in the 2015 document. And environmental impact assessment, which we've seen in the recent past. So I think there is an effort to weaken the existing strong foundations.
Right, fair enough. So my second part of the question, I think Disha, you'll connect with this more. Vimeo is a video solutions platform company, right? Just like any other platform like YouTube or TikTok, right? What do you think is a part of a social media company when creators like you or just activists like you put on the content onto the platform.
Sorry, can you just repeat your
Right.
question?
I'll tell you the underlying thing. So I'm not too sure if people are aware. There's a trust and safety team that sits behind every social media platform, right? That includes LinkedIn. I mean, numerous social media platforms. So the moment you probably just post something or click a picture, there's a machine, and there's also a person behind that machine who moderates that, right? So there are concerns, huge concerns coming in from North America, South America, Bolivia, just like you mentioned, Ecuador, where activists claim that their content is being banned, right? Because the governments asked for it. So each state has a different law for environment. Now, what do you think a social media platform's role should be? At least to protect your views.
I think one thing that I really admired was before Twitter was taken over by Elon Musk, RIP, Twitter India actually made an effort to really protect the democratic right of freedom of speech for a lot of citizens. And that, I think, should be the example, should be the standard, and we should be going about the standard to protect the freedom of speech of not just activists, but anyone, as long as it's not hate speech, of course. But and right now, there isn't a lot of freedom to post critical feedback about the environment or against corporations, and it has been taken down. It has been, the reach of the particular post has been limited, and we see this quite often with a lot of environmental posts as well, even in India. We don't know if there is proper data to support this, because it is done in a manner where when you post something else, you reach a wider audience, but when you post something that would require public attention, the engagement and the reach is much shorter. So what do social media platforms need to do is quite simple. They need to stop succumbing to legal notices. They need to grow a spine, honestly, and protect the rights of its users, because we are there trusting the agency to express our views, and that it is their job to protect us, which they're not doing right now. So almost every platform right now, at least the popular ones, are more scared of the government than of actually protecting the users, which is very concerning. And Twitter now is down the drain. So we need better security for users.
Since most of you mentioned forests, I was thinking about the tiger census we just seen in the papers. Now, Madhya Pradesh, the tigers have grown by some 700-800 numbers. Maybe I'm a little bit here or there. And Karnataka only some 15 or 20. So does this mean that MP has better activists than Karnataka? Does it mean they carry out their EIA studies in a much better way? Does it mean that the pollution thing is very much lesser? So what exactly is the reason? Maybe Disha, you would want to answer.
So I haven't actually read much about this.
No, I don't have any opinion on that, because that's not an area which I've really focused on unless Venkatesh wants to.
No, we cannot be judgmental. We will not pass judgment on that. But the constructs or that the kind of reports that come in by the governments, it all depends upon the kind of officers that we are engaged with. In fact, in last many years, I had an opportunity of meeting one of the finest officers who come with a very clear directive, ensure that decent reports are published. But also that there are the forces that happen, the kind of influences that happen because certain political dispensations, pleasing the political dispensation. So this is something which happens on a regular basis, that no pollution happening in a place where you see a rampant violation of environmental statutes, or that everything is demonstrated as hunky-dory. So the tweaking of the statistics. So many of these things happen. I think so. Therefore, when we look at any report, are there serious studies on that available? So by and large, we come across that in the southern part of India, there has been over a period of time. I'm not sure as of now all the time. I am always gives my personal opinion that good amount of officers have put forward, collected data and presented it as actual. Many a time, this data that has been presented speaks for itself. For example, the kind of DA report in this particular case, or the TNPSB reports in that case, or the Madurai institutions, or the many of these places, the officers have factual information has been shared. They have not passed any judgment on that, whether it's correct or not correct, whether it is within this. They have just presented this particular fact as is responsible officials. Now, I think that's something which is essential to be done. But unfortunately, as this is escalated to a level different, then the fudging of this record starts. That's when the challenge we come across. And great number of cases, part of my litigation that I have conducted, I see this fudging happens, and the moment they come to know that yes, continuation of this process may lead into troubled situations, therefore how to firefight, how to see that it is resolved. So therefore they come with a different set of data, different set of things, and by and large they're acceptable because the kind of persons we are. In fact, we look into this, how we use this information. She was talking about the data. It is so much inaccessible to people. So therefore, whatever is published, by and large people accept it as the truth. Is it true? Is still a suspect.
Hi, I just have a question. As an architect, we design buildings according to the regulations of the, we are designing it the coastal regulations, we follow those rules and regulations. When it comes to forest, we follow these bylaws. But why is it lacking even after the design comes out from, as we design it in the purpose of that it should be conserving, but it won't. But it should be legalized, but it won't. What is the problem lacking behind all these things as a legal advisor? What do you say as how can that be solved?
See, many of these, for example, compliance is part. See, for example, you have a thermal power plant. Example, design is done for a thermal power plant, and it burns coal. Heat is generated. So many other things. I'm not a science student. I can't say anything on that. I just got scared of it and became a lawyer. That's a different issue. Scrape through. I also tried my hand at it, scrape through, but subsequently I gave up on that. But what I found was that in the earlier part of my career, I also played a stint of a corporate legal advisor group of companies. So one of the company was in production of cement. I had gone to Karnataka State Pollution Control Board for clearance. And I was sitting there in the chamber, and the person walks in. And this is for this thermal power plant in Bangalore, Nagarjuna. And it's the concept related to the cooling towers for a thermal power plant. It's mandatory. I had no idea regarding cooling towers. It's only on that day I came to know about that. So I was sitting in front of the chairperson of the Pollution Control Board. He comes to him and says that, sir, it will be difficult to have 5 cooling towers. It's very prohibitive. Expensive. Then he says that, okay, do 3. I was aghast that it was so easy to scuttle down 2 cooling towers by the chairperson of the Pollution Control Board, who is supposed to enforce that. And that's part of the design submitted by the industry. Not that it was the design of the Pollution Control Board or anyone else. For compliance purpose, for securing permission to start a power plant, they had presented this particular plan that they would install 5 cooling towers. They said it's expensive. So he said, fine, 2, 3. As simple as that. Now, when I see, that's why when I was very agitated when I talk on these issues, the compliance processes, is that we have this kind of impunity of the agencies the agencies of the state and the state by itself, that not being looking into these aspects and ensuring compliance. So many of these things violations of the designs. When you talk in terms of the factory design, what is submitted to the agencies for approval is not something existing, something else is there out. Altogether different structure. I'm sure with every factory which is there, then you ask them, he said, sir, according to that plan, if you were to consider, it will be difficult. Therefore, we have changed it. In fact, some clients who come to us also inform us that we have violated these particular rules, so that, to be proper and good, sir, it's for the health of the industry that we do it. Now, the violations become so part of our construct that we have little or no respect for the law. And the agents of the state and the judiciary, many a time, in fact, I'm a part of this process, judges over a time, they say that, look, this has happened already. Do we have to revisit it? Or shall we look at it happens? It's for some of the benefit has come to people anyway. Some harm has happened. So many a time, except some cases like Godavardhan or some cases which are very, very important, or Bhopal caste tragedy or Kodaikanal case where the effort goes in, good number of cases just go down the drain because the court system feels that in the process of development, you have to pay some price. The process of quid pro quo, that's it, yeah. Sure.
Hi, this is a question for Amir. All the major environment stories that we see today are usually being reported by independent journalists, freelance journalists. So my question is, what is happening to the environment beat within the newsrooms?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting and glad that you noticed that. I think Disha and Anna would certainly certify that there used to be a time when most of the large news organizations at least used to have dedicated environmental desk. Some of them very respected environmentalists writing for them. So I think that's kind of past now. Now we have, but I think it's actually opened a new avenue. You would find that there's a whole lot of new forums which have come. Mongo Bay and quite a few very respected young environmental enthusiasts who's doing phenomenal work on that. Which is fine. I mean, as far as it's also part of the phasing out of the traditional media and moving into the digital media space. But it would have been nicer if the larger media outlets also have a dedicated environment team. But unfortunately, that's reality.
Hi, I'm Khushbu Garg and I'm working with a policy think tank. So my question is, 30 years back, like as you mentioned in the book, the factory was already causing devastation in Watertown, and yet it was established in India because foreign trade, economy, and all those reasons, development, right? And still, 30 years after that case, it is still happening. We've established that, right? The rules are there, but it is not getting implemented properly. So my question is, what more is required? Like, education is there, awareness is there, at least now, right? Rules are there, it is not getting implemented. What can be done to, decrease this? What can be done? Like what we can do? Maybe we can educate our policy makers or better regulation or some committees. Or do we need technology interference? Like, track everything, keep a track of everything, Industry 3.0, Industry 4.0. When will we reach that place where we cannot bend laws against environment? In your yours opinion.
Yeah, I'll start with, and of course, rest of them can pitch in. I think the most fundamental part of this is awareness. When we say awareness, it's not about creating awareness among the school-going children, which is certainly necessary. But I think awareness creation is a very constant process on what's happening and on what needs to be done. It's nothing short of an effort trying to educate a set of MPs because they are the one who are legislating, and a set of bureaucrats. They are the one who are executing it. So at every level, and we can't be complicit to the fact that these people know about it, and therefore we don't want to talk about it. So at every level, every time, awareness awareness creation is a necessary thing. So, I mean, what would you say, Risha?
No, this is a question I ask myself every day. So, so I think it is a combination of awareness and a bunch of other things, because one example is the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill is being tabled in the Rajya Sabha tomorrow. There's been a lot of effort to even create awareness among the Rajya Sabha MPs who are going to discuss this but don't actually know what it means for forests, what it means for communities who live in forests, or what it means for the rest of us who depend on forests if that bill gets passed tomorrow. So while awareness is key, it can't just be for ministers. It has to also start from a very young age. NCRT is cutting down environmental education. It's really firstly it was watered down, it's watering it down further. So I actually believe that it should start from a school level, because young children who grow up to question what is presented to them become active citizens, active participants of democracy, and that is important. It has to be awareness as well as accountability. We have to hold our leaders accountable. Their literal job is to serve us, and that they're not doing that. So it won't be a solution. Although blogs on the internet will tell you there are 10 ways to save the environment, there isn't. It's very important to try out old methods that environmentalists before us have come and taught us, and it's very important to explore different alternatives. It can be through social media, it can be through organizing, it can be through writing, it can be through journalism, and a bunch of other different ways of creating awareness and accountability, and making sure that environment is seen as an integral part. It's really bizarre to be even saying this, environment is seen as an integral part, because the one thing we cannot survive with is the air we breathe and the water we drink, the soil that gives us food. So it's bizarre that we have to convince people of this, especially those in power. But it is the job of all of us to do that, because at the end of the day, it's going to impact all of us. So it's going to be new methods every single time, and old methods. But it is important to create that accountability and awareness process.
So one thing I would like to add is that, by and large, people are aware of their environment they live in, because their livelihood is associated with it. The difficulty comes to people in that area is that when that gets changed because of some external factory, a factory coming in, or an industry coming into place, or a changing that's happening, they find it difficult to comprehend what exactly is this kind of a change. It's sometimes presented as an amazing advantage. In fact, for you, I come from Bellary. In 1983, I, along with my friends, did ride 2,000 kilometers, 1,200 kilometers on bicycle to demand that the government of India should install Bellary steel plant. And after 20 years, I come to know that having a steel plant would devastate the agriculture in my area. What are the little agriculture that we have? It's going to be livelihoods of almost the entire villages. If we were to go and visit now, we have a steel plant, but if we were to go and visit the entire area, you see that the agriculture is decimated. It does not exist in that area. Good part. So now as a person, we don't know. We think that generating employment is one thing which is sold to us. We buy that. So what exactly is that environment which we live in? People are aware of that. What the change that's bringing, we should be in a position to say impact of that, what exactly are the consequences of that kind of a development. I think that's an awareness that need to reach. And many a time, the challenge is that we talk in fora like this, but the message need to go to people in the language that they understand. The journalist in that particular local area should be the person who writes on this. He need to be informed. So awareness is at a level which is very, very ground level, and we need to engage with the younger population, younger generation which is there, and try to see that how they get informed about the same. I think this is a kind of process I see a change. Awareness is the fundamental rule. There is nothing can change before that. Once that happens, people will start asking questions. We have seen that happen in many places. We have triggered, in fact, in many of these places where we have seen change, we have triggered this from the local population. That brings in a change. We look into the case of Samata versus State of Andhra Pradesh is one of the landmark case on 5th schedule, which said that the government of Andhra Pradesh said that we are acquiring the land. So the 5th schedule says that land cannot be transferred to a non-tribal. So that lands of tribal is not transferred to a non-tribal, it is acquired by the state, said the government of Andhra Pradesh. It was challenged by an organization which did take very serious issue. The moot question was whether government is tribal. Supreme Court in Samata versus State of Andhra Pradesh said government is non-tribal. You understand that? Still it's being scuttled. Various methods are employed on that to ensure that the land is acquired. Good number of Balco and other things subsequently are Tata's for now or Adani who are doing it. They are violating that particular judgment and acquiring lands and doing mining. So the awareness is something that needs to be built from the place and ground up, and then change will happen. Compliance is what happens once people know what exactly the rights are, they will start demanding the compliance. And once compliance process starts, yes, you have a thing changing there. That kind of change needs to happen. I hope that.
So we wait for the day when the government becomes tribal.
I'd like to thank the panelists for their time and their discussion, and all of you for your questions. Thank you once again, Disha, Anna, Amir, and Venkatesh, and thank you all of you.